What's up, my kindred? I'm Leon, the Paperback Maniac, coming at you tonight with something a little different. You see, I have compiled 35 fun horror movies to watch in the month of October. Now, note the key word I just said there, fun. These are certainly not the 35 best horror movies to watch in October. These are just, my own personal preference, fun movies, all lighthearted. You're not going to be getting any serious, Oscar contending movies here. But, for viewers of my channel, I think you'll find that the selections I make, mostly of the B or C variety, are definitely of a piece with the kinds of pulpy paperbacks that I review. So if you're a fan of that sort of like zany, pulpy, B-grade horror, you might find something here to enjoy and hopefully maybe make a discovery or two. So without further ado, let's get to it. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. It's my cute Frankenstein's monster trick-or-treat mug. Just absolutely adorable, right? All right. So these are roughly in order of preference for October viewing. Definitely not order of preference for like overall, like favorites. But okay, number 35, we got a movie called Nightlife from 1989. This one was directed by David Akomba and written by Keith Critchlow. This is a quite obscure horror comedy from the 80s. In fact, it never made it to DVD. This right here is a bootleg, but it's a horror comedy that I've always enjoyed. It's basically about a teenage mortician named Archie who gets bullied a lot and has to deal with the 4 reanimated corpses of some terrible bullies. So it's not enough that they bullied him in real life; they come back as zombies to bully him some more, and it's just a fun time. It's just a lighthearted, fun, 80s horror comedy. If you like stuff like that, then this is definitely one to check out. And it's a shame that this movie is not out there. This seems like a movie that definitely should be on DVD or Blu-ray. Check it out if you can find it. It's a good one. All right, number 34 is The Witch, which is actually known in North America as Superstition. And this movie is from 1982, and it was directed by Galen Thompson and written by Michael O. Sajbel. This is also a quite obscure horror film. Basically revolves around a witch who is exacting revenge in the current day of 1982 on the ancestors of the people who persecuted her in the 17th century. And pretty fun. You get some, inventive death scenes and some cool, spooky atmosphere. Definitely, something fun to watch in the month of October. And is that not some beautiful artwork there? Just, super fun. This is definitely a movie that does not get talked about a lot. So I thought I would, mention it. All right, number 33, we've got The Brain. See, I'm telling you, these are just like the books I review. This one is from 1988, and it was directed by Ed Hunt and written by Barry Pearson. This is a Canadian production, and yeah, super fun movie, basically about this self-help guru played by the inimitable David Gale of Reanimator, and how he is trying to brainwash the country so that he can rule, everything through the use of this alien, creature, which he calls the Brain. And it got some great practical 80s effects, silly, lighthearted, fun. I mean, that word fun is going to come up a lot, but this one definitely fits that. This is a pretty obscure movie. I don't think it has a region A release. This is actually a UK DVD, but pretty cool cover art, right? All right, number 32 is The Granny. Now here's another obscure one. This movie was from 1995, and it was directed by Luca Bercovici and written by Sam Bernard. And it is your classic sort of like mid '90s straight to video trash concerning a granny who returns from the dead to get revenge on her shitty relatives who have all been waiting for her to die so that they could inherit her fortune. And it's got great, crappy '90s effects, gratuitous nudity out the ass, and just a bunch of just gore and fun. Just a fun '90s movie. I'm surprised this one has not, made a comeback. I could definitely see a company like Vinegar Syndrome releasing this on Blu-ray at some point. But yeah, this is also a bootleg. This is another movie that never made it to DVD, but it's a lot of fun, and it's actually perfect sort of October viewing. Okay, I don't know if I've already messed up these numbers because I like kind of crossed stuff out. But according to this, number 31, we've got Happy Hell Night. And this is yet another obscure movie. This came out in 1992, directed by Brian Owens and written by Michael Fitzpatrick, Brian Owens, and Ron Peterson. And it is pretty much your early '90s slasher. Kind of run of the mill, but it is cool because it does have a Halloween setting and deals with this basically the psychotic monk who escapes an insane asylum and is sort of like hell-bent on recreating these murders that he had done years before and on a frat house, killing frat kids. And who doesn't want to see frat kids murdered, right? But and the frat kids do a prank that actually unleashes him inadvertently. So yeah, it's nothing spectacular, but Code Red, I believe, put out this Blu-ray, and it's one of Code Red's cheaper ones, and I think definitely worth a watch. It's got a cool. I think this is also a Canadian production. It's got a cool like early '90s vibe, and it's got some pretty good deaths for that era of slasher. So Happy Hell Night, check it out. All right, number 30. One of my favorite 80s horror movies here. We've got Black Roses. This one came out in 1988, directed by John Fasano and written by Cindy Sorrell. And this is a heavy metal horror at its finest, folks. Basically, a rock group that is actually composed of demons comes to this small town and starts brainwashing the kids through its demonic heavy metal music, of course, and sort of, making them want to kill their parents and adults. But really, really fun movie, amazing 80s practical effects. I highly recommend Black Roses. And also, I would also recommend the director John Fasano's earlier film, another heavy metal horror film called Rock and Roll Nightmare, which is something that truly needs to be seen to be believed. Just an amazing film, and you don't even need to watch the riff tracks version. I have one of my coworkers keeps telling me to watch the riff tracks version, and I'm like, no, I don't want to watch the riff. I would just watch it as it is and be like totally entertained by it. But yeah. Okay, let me see here. Next up, number 29, we've got The Guest. This is one of the more recent films on this list. This came out in 2014, directed by Adam Wingard and written by Simon Barrett. And, the log line for this movie is Halloween meets the Terminator. Enough said, right? And it's got a cool Halloween setting, a cool vibe, and just really enjoyable for kind of like an indie, like suspense thriller. Like I really enjoy it and got a kick out of it. All right, number 28, Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse. This is another recent movie, and one that I think is very, very underrated. This thing came out in 2015, directed by Christopher Landon and written by Christopher Landon, Carly Wilson, and Emi Mochizuki. But I remember seeing this film the first year that I had moved to Southern California. Actually, my brother and I, we saw like a huge billboard in LA for this film. And I remember the cover art, like noticing that, like that old school kind of painted cover. And it really struck my, really kind of caught my eye, and I thought, what is that? That sounds interesting. And I noticed it was opening on Halloween Day, 2015. So Halloween Day, my brother and I went and saw this film. It was not very busy in the theater at all, and had a blast with it. It's just a very, very fun horror comedy. It really feels like a Fred Dekker movie, if you're familiar, who is going to be coming up later in this list. But definitely had the feel of like a Fred Dekker film for the new generation. And, like Fred Dekker's movie Monster Squad, also that movie didn't get any attention when it came out, totally bombed, and it took years for it to gain an appreciation. I suspect maybe that something like that may happen with this one, because it really is good. But, it's one that just people don't really talk about yet. All right. Next up, number 27, we've got The Deadly Spawn. Absolute classic independent horror movie from the 80s. This one came out in 1983, and it was written and directed by Douglas McKeown. God, I don't know. I can't say these names today. But awesome, almost like DIY horror. It definitely was made on a shoestring budget, but you can just tell the love that went into this thing. Amazing practical effects, amazing gore, and it's basically dealing with one of my favorite topics, which is kids facing off against evil. In this case, space aliens that have come to wreak havoc on this town, and it's just really, really fun. Definitely, of a piece with the types of books I review on this channel. Classic 80s horror. All right. Okay, number 26, we've got The Barn. This is another recent film. This came out in 2016 and is written and directed by Justin M. Seaman. Another unfortunate last name. This is, clearly, as you can see from the cover, sort of like a modern throwback to VHS era horror, and creature features and slashers. You could tell it's a kind of a kitchen sink. This guy threw everything that he loved into one movie. And you know what? I am usually pretty critical of modern movies trying to do like the throwback thing. I think it's very seldom done well. In this case, it was done pretty well. Definitely not a perfect movie. It definitely has some cringeworthy fake grain going over the clearly digital production, and I absolutely hate that. I hate it when filmmakers try to like make a movie that was clearly shot digitally like look like it was shot on film, and like try to like distress it and make it like give it those fake like cigarette burns. It just looks like shit, and this movie tried to do that. It's not convincing at all. However, if you look beyond that, it is a pretty cool storyline, and it does have some likable characters and some cool gore and cool creatures. You get like three kind of creatures that are part of this mythology. Definitely worth a watch. It's just oozing with sort of Halloween ambiance. So yeah, it gets my recommendation, The Barn. All right. Next up, number 25, we've got a classic, Pumpkinhead. This one came out in, I didn't write it down, 1988. Of course, directed by Stan Winston, the effects guru, and basically like a modern day fairy tale. Great mythology, amazing creature design there for Pumpkinhead. It's a classic, and it's a pretty heavy on the heartstrings story too when you think about it. And yeah, definitely, I'm sure you all know Pumpkinhead. Classic, you couldn't not mention it. Okay, number 24, we've got Trick or Treat, or otherwise known as Ragman, I guess, overseas. This is an import Blu-ray. But this is a more heavy metal horror. Very fun film. This came out in, I don't know, it doesn't say here. I think like probably 85-ish, I would guess, or something, somewhere around there. But yeah, fun movie. Another one of these movies that was kind of riffing on the whole like, satanic panic and the fact of like, if you listen to metal, like that's the devil's music. It's actually got cameos from like Ozzy Osbourne and other other like metal stars. But yeah, it's a fun movie, and it reminds me a lot of one of my favorite '90s movies, Brain Scan. I don't know, just like it has the same feel and tone of Brain Scan. So if you're familiar with that film, well, then you're probably familiar with this. But if not, definitely check it out. Trick or Treat. All right. Number 23. This one may be a little controversial, but I don't care. This is Clown House. And this one was, it was put out in 1989, written and directed by Victor Salva, kind of an unsavory character. Well, he's got some problems. And this movie is pretty obscure because of sort of the dark history of the film. There was some fucked up shit going on behind the scenes. But if you can separate the art from the artist, which I always espouse that you do, because where does it end, right? I mean, we still, if we were looking at the personal lives of these creators, it would really, limit a lot of what we could enjoy. But this is actually a very effectively done, creepy movie about a boy who is, basically trying to survive against these mental patients who have escaped the asylum and have murdered these clowns and assumed their identities. So it's like these psychotics dressed up as clowns, stalking these kids. Very, very well done and just creepy film. It's a shame that the filmmaker's sort of history has, relegated it to total, obscurity. But if you can track it down, I would recommend watching it. It's perfect. It is set also around Halloween, so it's perfect October viewing. Clown House. All right, number 22, we've got Cemetery of Terror. Now, this is a 1985 film written and directed by Ruben Galindo Jr., who did a couple of other fun, cheesy 80s horror movies. There's one called Don't Panic, I think. Total Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff. But today we're talking about Cemetery of Terror. This is just an 80s sort of perfect evocation of Halloween. These kids, what do? They steal a body from the morgue on Halloween night, and then, of course, they don't realize that it's a professor who, had mastered the art of, reanimation. They actually say like some incantation, bring him back, and also bring back all the corpses from the local cemetery. And it's almost like it almost feels like Michael Jackson's Thriller, the full length movie. It definitely kind of is hearkening back to Thriller, the great John Landis directed short film / music video. But yeah, Cemetery of Terror, this would actually make a great double bill with the 1985, that was also 85, I think, TV movie, The Midnight Hour. And that one, any true horror fan knows that film. That's also a very obscure one. I actually don't own that. But The Midnight Hour, also one of these fun, youth-centered Halloween flicks. Would make a great double bill with Cemetery of Terror. They both got a lot of atmosphere and are just good, light, pulpy fun. All right, number 21, we've got a classic here. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. This came out in 1948, directed by Charles Barton and written by Robert Lees, Frederick Rinaldo, and John Grant. I'm a big fan of horror comedy. It's one of my go-to, just like that. Those are like comfort films to me. And Abbott and Costello is probably the granddaddy of them all. Just the ultimate horror comedy. It's fun, it's dumb, it's silly, and just a great homage to the Universal monsters. So if you haven't seen this movie, October is the perfect month to check it out. All right. Okay, next up. Okay, number 20, I think. Got Slither. This is another fairly recent one. It came out in 2006. I guess it's not that recent. It seems recent, but 2006, shit, that's a long time ago. This is written and directed by James Gunn. Now, this is another movie that it feels like an 80s throwback to, say, like Fred Dekker movies or, movies like From Beyond, but it doesn't make it so obvious. Not like like the previous one, The Barn, where they put like this fake grain over the video. But this one, it has that feel. Definitely, inspired by, 80s horror. And, James Gunn, I think he tried to claim, he claims that he had not seen Night of the Creeps when he made this film, but I call bullshit on that. I think definitely heavily inspired by Night of the Creeps and movies like From Beyond, especially with like the final, like the guy's like final mutation. But that's great. I mean, he's stealing from the best. So if you like those films, definitely Slither is the movie for you. It's a lot of fun. Great little throwback to the 80s and back when horror movies had budgets and they had creativity and they were fun, right? All right, number 19, we've got The Gate. This movie came out in 1987, directed by Tibor Takis and written by Michael Nankin. And it's another one of those movies that deals with just my favorite sort of topic, which is young kids squaring off against supernatural evil. And it's also kind of a heavy metal horror movie in a way because the kid like plays a record backwards, and basically this gateway opens up in the kid's backyard that's sort of like a portal to hell, and it's got just amazing creatures, awesome stop motion effects. Just a whole lot of fun. The Gate is definitely, in the wheelhouse of, the books, the types of books that I review on this channel. Just a lot of fun. Good time with The Gate. All right. Number 18, An American Werewolf in London. Now, I mentioned earlier that Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein may be the granddaddy of all horror comedies. Well, this film is definitely a close second, in my opinion. This movie is one of the great horror films that also has comedy elements. See, this is how you do it right. This is a horror comedy, should be horror first, and then, sprinkled in with some comedy. Films like this and Fright Night, even Return of the Living Dead, I think, Reanimator, those films, they're not, overly jokey comedies with just like a horror wallpaper thrown on, like something like the Final Girls that recently came out that everyone loves. These are serious horror films that also have comedy. Just one of my all-time favorite horror films right here. A great film. I don't know if I said came out in 1981, written and directed by John Landis, who also did Thriller, and just an amazing film. So a must-watch for October. All right, next up, number 17, we got Prince of Darkness by John Carpenter. But actually, he directed it, and then he wrote it under the pseudonym Martin Quatermass. And this is a film that really has grown on me over the years. The first time I saw it, I'll admit I didn't get it, but I think it's one of Carpenter's most underrated films, and it's actually crept up into like my top, I don't know, maybe not top 5, but close. Like a really solid John Carpenter film. It's strange, it's esoteric, it's cerebral, it's creepy as all hell. It's got just some amazing imagery at the end, just haunting images. About basically, well, I couldn't even describe this film right off the top of my head right now, but these people find sort of this vat of glowing green liquid in this the basement of this church in downtown LA, and discover that it is sort of like the anti-god, or like the embodiment of Satan, which is where the name comes from. Definitely. Just a really fascinating and well-made film, and is perfect for October. If you haven't seen it, if you've been putting it off, I put it off for many years. Didn't like it at first, but now I love it. So definitely, check out Prince of Darkness. All right, number 16, we've got Witchboard. This film came out in 1986, written and directed by Kevin Tenney, who just had some great films back in the day. Here we have just exactly what I like: some good old-fashioned supernatural horror. Basically, some friends bust out the Ouija board during a party and unleash vengeful spirit. And the plot isn't anything new, but the way it's done with style, and it's got a little bit of a mystery to it, and it's just fun. It's a good fun 80s horror flick, which is one of the best things that you can watch in October, as far as I'm concerned. So definitely check out Witchboard. The sequel is also not bad. Okay. Next up, number 15. Okay, Return of the Living Dead. Now, if I said that An American Werewolf in London was a close second, well, this would be maybe a close third, because as far as horror comedies go, it doesn't get much better than this. Just an absolute blast from beginning to end. This film came out in 1985. It was directed by Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Aliens famously, and written by O'Bannon along with Rudy Ricci, Russell Streiner, and also the author John Russo, who it was actually the author of the original co-author of Night of the Living Dead with Romero. But then he had written, I think I told the history of this before on this channel, but he had written a sequel to Night of the Living Dead called Return of the Living Dead. And but the movie studio decided to go in another direction and hire Dan O'Bannon to adapt his novel, but then they kind of gave him credit, I guess. So in a way, I mean, this is very loosely based on John Russo's book. It's definitely more O'Bannon, probably, especially with all the comedy, but a blast. I love, the EC style zombies that they created for this. Just a fun movie that you can watch. Has a lot of replay value, over and over. All right, next one is a cheat, a shameless cheat. I've got a triple feature here, which I'm counting as one. This is number 14. It's the Stuart Gordon triple feature, because that's my man. So starting off, of course, with his best, Reanimator, adapted from the H.P. Lovecraft story. Reanimator came out in 1985. Just an amazing, another horror movie with comedic elements. Just some of the best writing and just character acting and gore. Jeffrey Combs as Reanimator is phenomenal. Just one of my favorite movies. So good. Okay, next we got his follow-up to that one, From Beyond, also adapted from an H.P. Lovecraft story loosely. This one came out the following year in 1986. Just amazing effects. Story's definitely not as good as Reanimator. It's just not as good, but it's still very good. And just I love like the whole idea of it, and just like the whole cosmic horror. Really well done Stuart Gordon movie with Barbara Crampton. Both Reanimator and From Beyond had her. And then finally, the third one is Dolls. This came out in 1987. And has kind of a different vibe from the previous two, but definitely a good time. Kind of more of like a subdued fairy tale, really. It's kind of an updated fairy tale, but well done and perfect. All three of those, really, perfect for the month of October for Halloween viewing. Speaking of Halloween and Halloween viewing, number 13, we've got Hackle Lantern. Yes, the famous VHS horror movie, also known as Halloween Night, I believe. This came out in 1988, directed by Jag Mundra and written by Carla Robinson. This right here is definitely the equivalent of a zebra horror novel. Just cheesy as all hell, silly as hell, but you just can't stop watching it. And surprisingly, it has some good like film work, camera work. Like, it actually looks decent for what it is. But a lot of people are going to tell you this is a bad movie. I mean, I don't know what's good or bad. All I know is I enjoyed the hell out of it. So definitely highly recommend Hackle Lantern for Halloween time, or any time. Shit. Okay, number 12. we've got The Burbs Classic. Now, this is more of a straight comedy, and I kind of just included this at the last minute in this list, but it's just such an enjoyable film. Directed by Joe Dante, and this one came out in 19, doesn't say 89 maybe? Or 88, I guess. That's the copyright. I thought it was, I don't know, it's 88 or 89. Great comedy. It's also got Corey Feldman in it. It's got just an all-around great cast. One of my, probably, one of my favorite Tom Hanks movies as well. Definitely check out The Burbs if you've never seen it. You can go back to this movie over and over again. Got a lot of great replay value. All right, number 11, we've got Monster House. Now, this is a film that came out in 2006, directed by Gil Kenan and written by Dan Harmon, though I think he's disavowed this movie since then, and Rob Schrab and Pamela Petler. And this is another movie about kids facing off against supernatural evil, and another great throwback to those 80s movies centered around kids. In fact, the movie is even sort of slyly set in the 80s, although they don't make it too obvious. But it clearly is, and it's clearly hearkening back to those Amblin films like Goonies, and it reminds me of movies like Monster Squad. It's even got like the fat friend. His nickname is Chowder. I mean, come on. Like, how much more 80s can you get? But this movie actually got attacked when it came out. A lot of parents were irate because they thought it was a children's film, and they took their kids, and their kids got super scared because it is a creepy movie. But I think, it's a movie for adults, really for all ages. I mean, shit, if I had a kid, I would make him watch this and probably scar him or her for a while, but it's a fun movie, and if you have avoided it because you thought, oh, it's just some kids movie, I would reconsider that, because it definitely has an edge, definitely has that fun, spooky Halloween vibe, perfect for October viewing. All right, I think we're in the top 10. Yes. All right, so number 10 is Tales of Halloween. This is an anthology that came out in 2015, and it's basically 10 different horror shorts, all directed by different filmmakers. And like all anthologies, it's not perfect. Not every short lands, but overall, all told, it is an enjoyable movie, and it definitely evokes a nice Halloween atmosphere. And a particular note to viewers on my channel, one of these shorts is co-directed by the splatterpunk legend John Skipp. I think his one was titled "This Means War," which is about neighbors kind of battling for the best Halloween decorations. But I would definitely recommend checking this out. As far as anthologies, it's fun, and a lot of them were the segments were well made, and just a treat to watch for October. All right, next I've got kind of another cheat. It's a double feature. Number 9 is a double feature of Night of the Demons and Night of the Demons 2. So Night of the Demons, the first one, came out in 1988 and was directed by Kevin Tenney and written by Joe Augustin. Night of the Demons 2 was directed by Brian Trenchard Smith and written by Joe Augustin. But these are both super fun movies. I particularly love the first one. It is just what I think of when I think of Halloween. And actually, I have memories of seeing this, a standee for this film way back in the day in an old mom and pop video store. It's one of those just weird memories that's burned into my brain. But I remember just staring at it and just being super creeped out by her. And I remember reading sort of the tagline talking about, Freddy and Jason were invited to this party but too scared to come. And I thought this thing must have been based on like the cover, the image of Angela, I thought, oh, this guy would be like the scariest movie of all time. I mean, little did I know how silly this movie is, and it's essentially, it's another one of these horror comedies. But yeah, like, and then years later, I watched it and loved it, and it's a go-to. It's a Halloween go-to. Night of the Demons 2 is also recommended. Both fun movies. Okay, number 8. Unapologetically love this movie. We've got Sleepwalkers. This thing came out in 1992, and it was directed by Mick Garris and written by Stephen King. And this thing was touted at the time as being the first story that King had written expressly for the silver screen. And I know that Scream Factory is actually coming out with a collector's edition of this Blu-ray next month, but I wish, and I know it's impossible, but I wish they could have gotten a commentary from Stephen King. I would love to hear him explain himself about this film, because this movie, to me, just does not seem like a Stephen King written script at all. This is way more zebra or maybe even like diamond horror than Stephen King horror. I mean, for one thing, it's got one-liners in this thing. One-liners that are just like real howlers. And, Stephen King was not known for writing one-liners. So, I mean, I don't know what he was thinking. I wish I could find out what he was thinking, what he was snorting or what. But just such a fun movie. Just an absolute ridiculous blast about this incestuous mother and son team of sleepwalkers. They're kind of like this mythical race. They need to find a virgin to feed mama because she's, hungry. It's just... it's ridiculous, and it's just so much fun, and it's the perfect movie to watch in October. For people who like the kind of books I review, Sleepwalkers is your movie, for sure. All right, number 7. Okay, Night of the Creeps. I mentioned Fred Dekker a couple of times earlier, and this was his first film, and this came out in 1986. And another one of my favorite films of the 80s. Just such, it's one of those amalgams, and interestingly, you can tell Fred Dekker just threw everything he loved into this movie. It's often the case with first films, as I mentioned earlier with The Barn, you could see that too. But with this one, it's just dripping with 1950s nostalgia, which is interesting because the movie was clearly like a throwback in many ways to 1950s B movies. Just like today in, 2018 and the last few years, all these movies have been throwbacks to the 80s. So it's kind of interesting how, nostalgia works on kind of like this 30-year cycle, right? Where you're always kind of looking back to the movies from your childhood. So Fred Dekker clearly was like riffing on movies like The Blob and other, classic, films from the 50s, but it just works so well. But he had the sense of still making it, look like an 80s film. So unlike today, when these filmmakers are making movies as throwbacks to the 80s, but then they're trying to make them set in the 80s. No, you don't need to do that. That's why Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, did it right. Like, you can set it in modern times, but have it have the spirit of that earlier era, just like Dekker did here with the 50s, with Night of the Creeps, which was made in the 80s. So, yeah, great film. All right, number 6. I don't know if this is going to be a shocker to anyone, but Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Yes, I only was going to select one Halloween movie to put in this list, and I went with this one, not the original, not the John Carpenter one, because Halloween 1 just gets enough talk. It's a great movie, but I really, really like Halloween 3 as well. In fact, this might be my second favorite in the whole franchise. Sometimes, if you catch me on a certain day, I might even say it's my favorite. I don't know. It's just a really good, well done movie. This came out in 1982. Got a lot of heat for many years because it didn't feature Michael Myers. It was a new story, but it's a great story. It's a great story. I mean, who doesn't want to see a story about some psychopath who wants to kill millions of kids on Halloween night through the use of like these latex horror masks? I mean, that's just awesome, right? So, Halloween 3, one of my absolute favorites of that series. Okay, number 5. We've got The Fog. Now going back to John Carpenter. This film from 1980, written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, just excellent atmosphere, creepy, atmospheric, just right, perfect for the holiday. I couldn't think of a better movie to set the mood of October than The Fog. Definitely a must watch. Okay, number 4, you've got Phantasm from 1979, written and directed by Don Coscarelli. One of my all-time favorite horror movies. Another one about a kid facing off against some creepy supernatural evil. This movie has been ripped off so many times since its release in the 70s. And just it's just a great story. It's a great story. This film's actually going to be playing this upcoming weekend in Santa Ana with a Q&A with Don Coscarelli. I am very excited to check that out. Definitely one of my favorite horror films and great for October, as I keep saying. All right, down to the last 3. Number 3, we've got The Blob, the 1988 version. This is a remake of a 50s movie, The Blob, and directed by Chuck Russell and written by Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont. I think I've mentioned this movie before on this channel. One of my all-time favorite creature features. This movie just does everything right. Another one, interestingly, another 80s film that was hearkening back to the 50s, but was clearly making a modern film with cutting-edge special effects of the time. And some of these special effects, all practical, just blow me away. They're just so well done, and the movie really holds up. It's got a great script, good characters, just a perfect Halloween or October film to watch and enjoy. Great popcorn fun. All right, I mean these last 2 are kind of interchangeable, but number 2, we've got The Monster Squad. Yes, Fred Dekker again. Now this man definitely knew how to please my heart. Monster Squad came out in 1987, directed by Fred Dekker and written by Fred Dekker and Shane Black, filmmaker who then later after this went on to write Lethal Weapon and a bunch of blockbusters. What a great duo they were. And they wrote this movie together, basically an homage to the Universal monsters. It's basically, as they called it, the Little Rascals meet, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. And just an absolute blast. I love this film. It's got so much replay value. Fred Dekker and Shane Black, the writers of this, they recently collaborated again on a film that recently came and went, bombed terribly, The Predator, which I am a defender of. I think that film actually feels a lot like the kinds of stuff that they were making back in the day. Definitely has that old school kind of charm. Hopefully, people will, appreciate that movie later on. But anyway, The Monster Squad, what is there to say about this film? Just like the ultimate sort of Halloween watch. Great gateway horror, too, if you've got young ones and you're trying to get them in. Although it is pretty scary. Like, it's not, like, for very young kids. And number 1, right now, my favorite film for the holidays definitely has got to be Trick or Treat from 2007. Written and directed by Michael Dougherty, pretty much has the ultimate Halloween atmosphere. It's a film set in the Midwest, where I grew up enjoying Halloweens as a kid. And, it's basically sort of an anthology, but with interconnected stories that all kind of come together in a satisfying way. Great characters. The character of Sam is fun. And, just an annual viewing, just a very enjoyable sort of go-to October watch. So I'm sure everyone who's watching this video has seen Trick or Treat. If you haven't for some reason, you need to get on it because it is amazing. So there you go, guys. That is my 35 fun horror movies with some cheats to watch in October. Hopefully you came across some movies there that you hadn't seen or heard about before. That's what this channel is all about. It's sort of highlighting sort of the obscure, the sort of underrated, the forgotten. So and obviously like I had to limit it to that. There are so many more honorable mentions I could have said. I mean, I left off Fright Night. I left off A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The House by the Cemetery, House, The Kiss, all kinds of. I mean, there's so many, right? But Anyway, hope you guys are having a good Halloween, good October. I will see you again soon with another review, another Halloween themed book review. Until then, take it easy, guys. Peace out.